When I was 15, I got my first girlfriend. Her name was Casey, and she lived just a couple of blocks away from me in a really quiet, upper-class neighborhood. Since she was so close, I'd usually walk over to her house at night whenever I had nothing better to do. One Thursday during a school break, I decided to head over to her place. It was getting pretty late, but my parents weren't strict about curfews, so I wasn't worried about the time. A few minutes into the walk, though, I started noticing strange sounds around me, mostly from somewhere behind me. The first thing I heard was a bush rustling. I glanced back for a second, but didn't stop walking. I just picked up my pace a little. By the time I reached the next block, I heard another noise. This time, it sounded like a small branch snapping. I stopped and looked behind me. The street was completely empty. On both sides of the road were long rows of bushes separating the sidewalks from people's yards. It was basically a wall of greenery, but I couldn't see anyone hiding there or anything that could explain the noises. At that point, I started walking even faster. I was getting close to Casey's house, so I figured I'd be there in a minute anyway. Then I heard another sound. This time, it sounded a lot more like footsteps. Fast, light footsteps. I turned around again while still moving. Nothing. Nobody. I could already see Casey's house up ahead. Feeling uneasy, I called her. She answered immediately, and I told her I was getting seriously creeped out because I kept hearing weird noises behind me. I walked past the bushes around her driveway and stepped onto her property. Looking up, I saw Casey standing at her bedroom window on the second floor. She smiled and waved while laughing at me over the phone, and I waved back. Then her voice suddenly changed.
"Who's that guy standing right behind you?"
I spun around and saw a grown man crouched down only about 10 feet behind me. I completely lost it. I screamed and sprinted toward the front door, pounding on it as hard as I could. The man caught up to me and grabbed me, trying to pull me into some kind of headlock. For whatever reason, he suddenly let go and took off running. A second later, Casey's mom yanked the door open. The look on her face told me she had seen enough to know something was seriously wrong. She pulled me inside and slammed the door shut behind me while Casey ran downstairs. I could barely catch my breath. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Casey's mom wrapped her arms around me, asked what happened, and then called the police to report a dangerous man wandering around the neighborhood. Needless to say, she let me stay at their house that night. The next day, she drove me home herself. One night, there was a really intense storm outside. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV. My parents were downstairs in the living room watching a comedy, and my sister was upstairs playing video games. Normally, I loved nights like that. The sound of heavy rain always helped me relax. That peaceful feeling disappeared instantly when there was a massive bang against my bedroom window. I jumped out of my bed and looked outside. There was somebody standing right outside my window. The rain was coming down so hard that it distorted everything, making it impossible to clearly see the person's face. Then he started slamming his hands against the glass. It sounded like he was yelling for help. I cracked the window open slightly and the man shouted, "Let me in! I'm hurt!" The rain was so loud that I had to yell back. I told him to go around to the front door, then I shut the window. I immediately ran into the living room and told my dad that there was a man outside who seemed injured and was begging for help. A few seconds later, we heard loud banging coming from the front door, along with more desperate shouting. My dad started walking toward the door and reached for the handle, but I stopped him. I said, "Wait." Something about the whole situation felt off, and I wasn't convinced opening the door was a good idea. Right then, the phone rang. The caller ID on the TV showed it was our next-door neighbor. My dad rushed over and answered it. A moment later, I heard him say, "No fucking way." The second he said that, I knew something was seriously wrong. He hung up and immediately told all of us to stay away from the front door. He didn't explain anything at first. Instead, he carefully walked to the window and peeked outside. What he saw made everything clear. The man was crouched on our front step, still pounding on the door, and he was holding some kind of large, sharp object in his hand. My dad shouted through the door, warning him to leave before the police arrived. Then he called the cops himself. Eventually, the banging stopped. When we checked again, the man was gone. Later, my dad explained what our neighbor had told him on the phone. Apparently, he had seen a rough-looking man sneaking around his backyard. The guy had been searching through his shed and eventually came out carrying a large chopping axe. Not long afterward, the police found the man wandering through nearby streets and took him into custody. A few days later, the whole incident ended up making the local newspaper. This story happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it around a year ago, and honestly, it's one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in China. A few years ago, she was helping one of her high school students prepare for exams. They ended up studying much later than expected, and by the time they finished, the buses had already stopped running for the night. The student lived pretty far away, so he asked if he could stay at her apartment and catch the first bus in the morning. At first, Minji wasn't comfortable with the idea. Having a teenage male student spend the night in her apartment seemed like a situation she'd rather avoid, but the boy kept pleading with her, and eventually she agreed. She lived in a small, one-room apartment. When they got back, Minji went to sleep in her bed while the student spread out a blanket on the floor beside it. Before long, they both fell asleep. A few hours later, sometime around 2 in the morning, Minji was suddenly woken up. The student was standing over her. He said, "I'm starving. Let's go get something to eat." Minji stared at him.
Food? Right now?
She asked.
It's 2 in the morning. Go back to sleep.
But the student wouldn't let it go.
No, I'm really hungry. Let's go.
Minji pointed out that she had instant ramen in the apartment and told him he could make some for himself if he wanted. That wasn't good enough. He insisted there was a restaurant nearby that stayed open all night and kept trying to convince her to go with him. After several minutes of him refusing to give up, Minji finally agreed. They got dressed, left the apartment, and walked outside. The moment they reached the street, the student's entire attitude changed. He looked at Minji and quietly said,
I'm not actually hungry.
Confused, she asked what he meant. The boy took a deep breath and said,
I woke up during the night and looked under your bed.
Then he paused.
There's a man sleeping under there.
For a second, Minji thought he had to be joking, but he wasn't. The student explained that because he was sleeping on the floor, he had a clear view underneath the bed. When he woke up, he noticed someone lying there in the darkness, completely hidden from Minji's perspective. The reason he kept insisting they leave wasn't because he wanted food. He was trying to get her out of the apartment without alerting the stranger. Once they were safely outside, they called the police. When officers searched the apartment, they discovered that the man was homeless and had somehow been secretly living inside Minji's apartment. According to the investigation, he had apparently been sneaking in and sleeping under her bed for nearly 2 months. The only reason he was finally discovered was because the student happened to be sleeping on the floor and had the one angle in the room that allowed him to see underneath the bed.